What if you could take a step back and look at the world? Explore the line between certainty and doubt. You are listening to the Illumination Hour with your host, Ellen Stallone. Hello everyone, welcome to the first episode of the Illumination Hour. So, I wanted to talk a little bit about the show, what it is, what's going on, before we even get into the first topic. So, I chose the name Illumination Hour because I wanted the show to be something where I could just take one topic and expand and maybe shed some light on it for you. Like it said in the introduction, I want to explore that line between what we know to be true and what we don't know, because there's a lot more that is going on out there in the universe that we have no idea about. For all the facts and information that we've gathered, we really, just don't know that much. But we're learning more and more each day, and I wanted to talk about that. Basically, I'm going to cover in this show science, music, philosophy, psychology, anything that I find interesting. I'm going to find one topic and talk about that for an hour. And I really like asking questions because that is the foundation for all of the answers that we find in life. You can't find answers to things without asking questions. Am I right? So we're going to take whatever information we have and evaluate it. And I don't really want to cover news topics on this show. There's all sorts of news organizations out there that do that for me. And a lot of it, you don't really know what's true and what's false. And it's interpretations of things and third-hand information. So I'm going to stay away from that because I want the show to be something that is fact-based, it's positive, and it keeps you engaged. It doesn't leave you feeling a sense of pessimism. That's what I feel whenever I turn on the news. So we're going to stay focused on things that we can prove and things that we do know and things that will ultimately benefit our life. So with that in mind, now we can move on to the actual topic I wanted to talk about today, which is imagination and creativity. Now, what really is that? Everyone seems to think, it's easy. It's just when you think about things in a new or different way. It's not so clear-cut once you start searching more into it. The definition of creativity, according to Wikipedia, is the faculty or action of forming new ideas or images or concepts of external objects not present to the senses. So, basically they're saying, you think about things that don't really exist. Now that's true, that's part of it, but we can go a little more in depth than that. How about this one? The ability of the mind to be creative or resourceful. Well, that's true. You can be resourceful and think of new solutions to problems, but there has to be something more to creativity. Something more than just solving problems. Now, I'm not going to deny that's a big factor in creativity. That's something that's very useful. But creativity and imagination, they cover so many different realms. Let's talk about that for a little bit. What exactly is creativity? How does it apply? I'm going to be reading from an online source from the University of Pennsylvania. It's from a website called Authentic Happiness. Ooh, doesn't that sound wonderful? Anyway, in this page, they're talking about creativity and imagination. So here, creativity is defined by psychological scientists as the generation of ideas or products that are both original and valuable. Creativity relies on imagination, the conscious representation of what is not immediately present to the senses. Again, there we have that definition of seeing things that aren't actually there. Although research on creativity has increased in quality and quantity since J.P. Guilford's presidential address to the American Psychological Association in 1950, this fundamental human ability remains understudied in comparison to other important psychological phenomena. One important antecedent to creative behavior is motivation. Why do individuals engage in creative work? What benefits, if any, do they anticipate? Well, I know from my experiences personally, when I create something, I really enjoy being able to share it with other people. I want to take what's in my head, the thoughts and ideas that are bouncing around in there, and I want to push them out through my hands or my mouth or whatever means I have available to me, and turn it into something real and palpable that other people can enjoy. And that, to me, is really the greatest thing that you can expect from creating something. I mean, what better feeling can you experience than making some delicious food that people love to eat, and they tell you, oh, this is so good, this is the best chocolate pie I've ever had. Or if you write a really funny poem and you read it out loud and everybody's laughing and having a good time and they talk to you about it afterwards, it's the best. It's the best feeling. Past research on this important topic has shown that individuals who are intrinsically motivated tend to be more creative. Oh, well, thank you. In other words, individuals who engage in creative activities for the sake of the activities themselves and not for the sake of extrinsic constraints of rewards. The first thing that comes to mind is money or fame. Some people do, strangely enough, only create things for extrinsic motivations. But this is saying intrinsic ones are better. And people who are intrinsically motivated are better able to come up with original and valuable ideas. In addition, a small but growing body of literature suggests that pro-social motivation, defined as the desire to contribute to the lives of others, may also enhance creative thinking. Well, that's true. If, say, you're an interior designer, what you have in mind when you're designing whatever it is, the interior of some house, apartment, whatever you're hired for, you are keeping your customer in mind. You are designing it for their benefit so that they have a more useful, flowing lifestyle around them. Past research also suggests that creative activities may have therapeutic benefits and enhance well-being. To date, little research has investigated the mechanisms explaining how creative thinking may confer its benefits, but that still means it's true. It does give you a better sense of well-being. Current research projects at our center examine the possibility that creative thinking may enhance well-being by enhancing cognitive flexibility and problem-solving abilities by providing individuals with an important sense of mastery and agency, and by helping individuals perceive benefits after going through adversity. Well, now think about that for a minute. It provides individuals with a sense of mastery and agency. Have you ever done something so much or so long that you feel like you've mastered the skill, or that you're capable of doing things beyond it? It gives you a sense of confidence in yourself. Maybe you finish a painting and you look at it and you just think, wow, there's so much time and effort put into this and it's beautiful and I love it and it conveys so much. It's fulfilling and it gives you a sense of well-being and that feeling that you can do anything you set your mind to. Also, perceiving benefits after going through adversity. Think of how many movies you've seen that are based on very depressing topics. The Holocaust, a murder of a family member, maybe a car accident. These are all things that none of us really want to go through or enjoy going through. But if you can take that negative experience and channel it into some sort of creative output. Maybe you can find some meaning in it. Maybe you can turn it into something that is beneficial. You can gain an experience from it that will benefit you for the rest of your life. Whoever thought that art could be such a useful and ultimately necessary skill, not just for enjoying yourself or feeling better, but for developing your ability to get through everyday life. Now, there's a lot I could talk about on this topic, using art as a therapy to get over trauma or adversity. I used to work with mentally ill or brain damaged people, and a large part of their treatment plans involved doing arts and crafts and using their hands and their brain and creating something out of the chaos that was their mind. But I'm not going to go into that so much today because that's not what this topic is about. We're going to stay focused on what is creativity? Where does it come from? Now I'm going to be reading to you from a study at Dartmouth on medicalnewstoday.com. Have you ever wondered where imagination comes from, what makes us creative, and why we think scientifically or create art and invent tools? Philosophers have argued for thousands of years about the essence of imagination, but scientists at Dartmouth College believe their study brings us closer to the answer. According to lead researcher Alex Schleger, a graduate student in the Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences, the answer lies in the human brain's mental workspace, a widespread neural network that coordinates activity across several regions in the brain and consciously manipulates symbols, images, ideas, and theories. The study was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, shows how humans are able to focus intensely and rapidly in order to solve complex problems and think up new ideas. Schlegel says our findings move us closer to understanding how the organization of our brains sets us apart from other species and provides such a rich internal playground for us to think freely and creatively. Understanding these differences will give us insights into where human creativity comes from and possibly allow us to recreate those same creative processes in machines. Now, soon enough, I'm going to talk about where human creativity comes from a historical evolutionary standpoint. Right now, we're just talking about how it arises in the organic matter of your brain. Researchers have long suggested that human imagination exists thanks to a widespread neural network in the brain. However, clearly demonstrating that such a mental workspace exists has been extremely difficult with available techniques that only manage to examine brain activity in isolation. So that's not very helpful if you're trying to see the sea of surging and ebbing and flowing electricity and blood in the brain. You have to see it in action and not just capture snapshots of it. So how do we manipulate mental imagery? The Dartmouth scientists approached the issue by asking, how does the brain allow us to manipulate mental imagery? The authors gave the example of human beings asked to examine a bumblebee, but instead of just a bumblebee, you have to imagine a bumblebee with the head of a bull. Now think of that. You've never seen one actually in existence. But there it is. Your brain conjures it up. There's the big yellow and black striped body with the 6 legs and the wings, and then a big brown head of a bull with horns sticking out. Most of us would find the task easy. However, in order to make the image appear in our mind's eye, the human brain has to construct a totally new image, seemingly out of nowhere. 15 volunteers were asked to conjure up in their minds specific visual shapes and then mentally combine them into more complicated figures. Others had to create complex images in their mind and then mentally dismantle them into their separate parts. With the use of functional magnetic resonance imagery, the team was able to assemble the volunteers' brain activity. Schlegel and colleagues had expected the visual cortex, the part of the brain that processes imagery, to be actively involved in driving mental manipulation. This study confirms this, but they also discovered several other regions appear to be involved in manipulating imaginary shapes. So I'm looking at a picture of a brain right now from the fMRI machine, and there's all sorts of colors all over the brain on this. A lot of the rear brain, a lot of the top and the front. There's a few specks down low, but the lower brain is mostly preserved for memory and basic emotions. So, it makes sense. The study confirmed what most scholars had theorized, that the mental workspace is responsible for most of human conscious experience and the flexible cognitive abilities we have evolved. The team added further studies are needed to better understand how these neural networks function. But the study shows that when it comes to complex human cognitive behaviors, we need to look at how the brain acts as a whole rather than its isolated parts. Another interesting thing to consider is that how we perceive the world around us is also affected by our world inside. What we imagine has external effects. We often think about the things we imagine and the things we perceive as being clearly dissociable. However, what this study shows is that our imagination of a sound or a shape can change how we perceive the world around us in the same way as actually hearing that sound or seeing that shape does. Specifically, it was found that when we imagine hearing things, that changes what we actually see. And when we imagine seeing things, that changes what we actually hear. That's crazy, isn't it? I mean, you could be watching a door shut, and although it's shut silently, you imagine the sound. That's how powerful your brain is. It can determine your reality to some small extent. Maybe it just fills it with a little color or sound every now and then. But let's get back on track here. So where does creativity actually come from? Where does it stem from? So if you're a believer in science like me, you believe that humans evolved over a series of millions of years. And it wasn't like we just popped out of monkeys one day. It was more like a slow developmental process of us crawling out of the primordial ooze and slowly changing and survival of the fittest. So creativity is something that developed and evolved, but where did it originate? Well, some scientists believe that it emerged from the creation of art and mating rituals, but it's all very complex. So I'm going to now read from a scientific paper on ncbi.gov, and this paper is about the evolution of human artistic creativity. Creating visual art is one of the defining characteristics of the human species, but the small, infinitesimal amount of archaeological evidence means that we have limited information on the origin and evolution of this aspect of human culture. The components of art include color, pattern, and the reproduction of visual likeness. So, most artists will make something that looks like something that you would find in nature, such as plants or flowers or animals or even other people. The 2D and 3D art forms that were created by Upper Paleolithic Europeans at least 30,000 years ago are conceptually equivalent to those in recent centuries, including that human cognition and symboling activity, as well as anatomy, were fully modern at that time. The origins of art are therefore much more ancient and lie within Africa, before worldwide human dispersal. The earliest known evidence of artistic behavior is of human body decoration, including skin coloring with ochre and the use of beads, although both may have been functional origins. Zigzag and crisscross patterns, nested curves, and parallel lines are the earliest known patterns to have been created separately from the body. Their similarity to entropic phenomena, which I know that's a fancy word, it means involuntary products of the visual system. So that means something like a hallucination. So that suggests a physiological origin. 3D art may have begun with human likeness recognition in natural objects, which were modified to enhance that likeness. Some 2D art has also clearly been influenced by suggestive features of an uneven surface. The creation of images from the imagination, or the mind's eye, required a seminal evolutionary change in the neural structures underpinning perception. This change would have a survival advantage in both tool making and hunting. Analysis of early tool-making techniques suggests that creating 3D objects, such as sculptures, involves their cognitive deconstruction into a series of surfaces, a principle that could have been applied to early sculpture. The cognitive ability to create art separate from the body must have originated in Africa, but the practice may have begun at different times in genetically and culturally distinct groups, both within Africa and during global dispersal. So this isn't something that just evolved once and there it is, you've got a finished product that is the human need for art. No, this is something that developed independently throughout the different tribes and groups of people that were wandering around. Even though it originated in a similar time in a similar place, it changed throughout time, as you can clearly see looking back through history. So this global dispersal led to the regional variety seen in both ancient and recent art. At all stages in the evolution of artistic creativity, stylistic change must have been due to rare, highly gifted individuals. Or, as I like to think of it, if you studied genetics, if you know anything about genes, you know that when animals and plants reproduce, they copy their genes, their instructions for what to produce in the body, and they pass it down to their offspring. But sometimes there are slight errors in the genome which cause mutations. Now, this is a very common phenomena. This is something that happens every single day, all the time. There's genes that are being copied and little mistakes in the code that are being made, and that leads to the variety that we now have in life. That's why there's so many different species on Earth. Now, I like to think that instead of all of the variety in art being due to these highly gifted individuals that just suddenly came up with new bright ideas, maybe some of these changes were due to small errors in copying, or maybe some early human drew a line the wrong way and stepped back to look at it and said, you know, that looks pretty good. I think I'll leave it that way. And there we have it, all the variety of art. But that's just my personal theory. I could be wrong. I'm no historian. So going deeper into this theory, we have a better explanation of what I meant when I said that art is based loosely on mating rituals. So again, art in its many forms is practiced by almost all human cultures and can be regarded as one of the defining characteristics of the human species. In all societies today, the visual arts are intimately intertwined with music, dance, ritual, such as making life landmarks, death landmarks, death itself, religion, and politics. That's a ritual. And language, such as poetry, song, and storytelling. Vocalization, ritualized movement, and visual display are part of animal courtship and dominance competition, as well as human ritual and communication. So it is likely that the roots of music, dance, and body decoration lie deep in the evolutionary history of the animal kingdom. Nevertheless, with the evolution of human cognition, they were deployed in new ways, with complex symbolic meaning becoming attached to them. There's good evidence for a neurological relationship between visual creativity and language. There was a study done on brain activity of subjects who had become expert in early Stone Age toolmaking. The tools were of the Oldowan and Acheulean types, representing a period of some 2 million years, during which time the brain of our hominin ancestors expanded and tools became more advanced. The brain activation detected by positron emission tomography during tool making included both visuomotor and language circuits, suggesting that tool making and language share a common basis in the human capacity for complex, goal-directed manual activity. As this includes artistic creativity, evidence of the increasing sophistication of tool technology, as well as evidence from crania of increasing brain size, suggests that our ancestors had the ability to create art or proto-art much earlier in evolution than is suggested by current knowledge of art-related artifacts. There is no consensus on how to define art, although most definitions emphasize aesthetics. We identify artworks in a formal sense because we find them aesthetically pleasing, and we find that they enhance our perception of the world around us through the apt use of images. Art has also been defined as objects produced with the intention that they be aesthetically pleasing and not merely pragmatically functional. So you don't need something that is actually useful to be artwork. Most artwork, let's be honest, it's useless. Have you ever been to an abstract art museum? Can't do anything with those paintings except start a fire. A broader definition would include the decoration of useful objects, such as tools and weapons, and allow for the possibility that most early art may have had a ritual or religious significance. We simply cannot know whether any prehistoric art was created simply for the sake of providing aesthetic pleasure, although there must surely have been an element of this on the part of both artist and viewer. It is also generally accepted that art incorporates a symbolic element, but even where symbolism was not included, a pattern or animal shape may have had a totemic function. A particular pattern or animal form may be specific to a group or tribe and may mark their territory or clothing. Have you ever seen biker gangs riding around on their hogs with their names and their leather jackets? It's kind of what it reminds me of. That and sports teams. The cross-cultural view of what can be categorized as art in European and Australian context are also relevant to the prehistoric perspective. Until recently, Aboriginal art was considered as being of only ethnographic interest. A more open-minded and informed view has resulted in the inclusion of this category of art in mainstream galleries. In this article, there is an inclusive view of art to encompass the use of color applied to the body, another natural or created 3D object or a flat surface, pattern, whether or not made with symbolic intent, the modification of naturally occurring forms, the de novo creation of 2D or 3D images. The first three of these probably arose independently, but the fourth synthesizes elements of all of them, as well as representing a fundamental cognition-related change. There is evidence presented that the origins of art lie within Africa, and that the oldest known European art was already recognizably characteristic of this region some 30,000 years ago. Although few in number, artifacts from older excavations in Africa and the Levant, which is the strip of land forming the eastern border of the Mediterranean Sea, this suggests some of the possible stages in the evolution of human artistic creativity preceding the stage at which the evolution of technical skills, combined with the evolution of modern cognition, enabled humans to make representations of living beings in 2 or 3 dimensions. So, like we previously stated, art has a long history as far as humans go, dating back hundreds of thousands of years. Artistic creativity has a long history well before the developed art of the European Upper Paleolithic, which was created by anatomically modern humans, whose brains, although not culture or tradition, were likely ours. Linking this history to the evolutionary anatomy of cognition is impossible for 3 reasons. 1. Cranial capacity, and hence brain size, is only a crude indication of cerebral function, as illustrated by the fact that the similar cranial capacities of Neanderthals and anatomically modern humans are not matched by equivalent artistic creativity or flexibility in tool-making. That's right, we're number 1. Number 2. The huge individual differences in artistic skills among humans in our own time make it plain that a study of brain evolutionary anatomy would be meaningless for this purpose, even if we had access to fresh material, such as non-petrified dead bodies, or living ones. Living ones would be better. And 3, studies on brain-damaged artists have failed to reveal specific parts of the cortex that are essential for artistic creativity, which seems to use many different areas. We have only the artifacts and the archaeological context. Surviving art and putative proto-art artifacts have left a fragmented record that has encouraged the probably erroneous, or at least exaggerated, concept of a revolution at the start of the European Upper Paleolithic. Lithic tools, which are tools made out of stone, in contrast, are plentiful and provide a much more complete guide to the evolution of the cognitive abilities and manual dexterity required to engineer defined shapes. Reference has been made in this article to studies indicating a link between tool making and language, and to a possible link to the cognitive skills required for art. Both of these studies analyzed relatively simple tools made by Homo erectus. Further development of these promising avenues of research through analysis of the changing patterns of toolmaking by Homo heidelbergensis, Homo neanderthalensis, and early Homo sapiens, that's us, might shed some light on the evolution of artistic creativity. The analysis of Golet is particularly helpful in its insight into the closely related nature of 2D and 3D visualization. Linking anatomy to the origins of art is impossible for a fourth reason. The cognitive machinery required for the creation of art de novo, which means as an advanced on likeness recognition and modification, must have been in place well before the first exceptionally gifted individuals actually created what we now regard as art. Art does not exist in a vacuum, but requires a social context. Otherwise, it is meaningless. To be fully seen by a viewer, there must be some awareness of the symbolism being communicated. The social context of humans has universal elements. Those relating to survival, reproduction, and religion have been alluded to in this article. The religious element is specifically communicated to us through parietal art, but the spiritual aspect portrayed here seems to encompass limited aspects of life and death. The paintings suggest that the ultimate discontinuity of body and spirit represented by death had been come to terms with through belief in the continuity of the human spirit with that of animals. But there is another basic element of the human need to explain where we come from that is either missing or not yet identified. A creation myth. This could be subsumed within the animal-human spiritual continuity, but extant human societies have origin myths that are distinct from explanations of death. Creation myths could have been communicated through storytelling and song, but one would not still expect some representation through visual art. Although there is a great deal that cannot be known about the origins of art, some things are becoming clear. The virtually ubiquitous existence of art today suggests that the neurological potential to create art was established within all of the human populations who remained within and migrated out of Africa. That article was brought to you by the author J. Annette. And now, we're going to look at some of the oldest art ever discovered and maybe see if we can extrapolate some meaning from it. I mean, we've kind of been talking about how art arose from reproductive ceremonies or tool making or weapon making. But what did this art actually look like? What was on the minds of prehistoric people? Well, I have a list here of some of the oldest art pieces ever discovered, and we're just going to take a glance through some of them and see what we can find out. So, one that I've been seeing a lot of that keeps popping up in these ancient artifact websites is Venus of Hull Fells. which some of you may recognize. It is usually a carving of a woman who may or may not be pregnant. She may just be fat, which back before the 20th century and in various other cultures around the world, being fat was not such a bad thing. It was actually looked upon as a symbol of wealth or being healthy. So these are what prehistoric people would consider highly healthy individuals, not to mention very busty. Maybe this woman was lactating because of the pregnancy that may or may not be there. She also has very wide hips. So there's some obvious fertility symbolism going on here. And these carvings, these statues, it wasn't found just in one place. It was found in many, many different places. Perhaps these were figurines that young mothers had to remind them that it's okay to have your first child. Or maybe males had them around as kind of like a sex toy thing. I don't know what was going on with that. But regardless, it's an interesting thing. The first sculpture discovered was dated to the period somewhere between 38,000 and 33,000 BCE. Discovered in southwestern Germany, the small ivory carving of female figurine was known as the Venus of Hull Fels, or the Venus of, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, Schellklingen. It was discovered in 2008 by an archaeological team led by Nicholas J. Conard. Another one, the Lion Man of the Hohenstein-Stattel. Now, this one looks like it has the body of a man, and it's standing upright. It has kind of short arms and short legs, almost like it's a lion standing in an upright hominid position or stance. So there's something manly about it, in that it looks like a man standing up, but the head is quite clearly of a lion. And there's no large mane or anything, it's just a lion's head. There are some genitals on this thing, and they're not female. So that's why they call it the Lion Man of the Hohenstein-Stattel. And this one was also dated to be from 38,000 BCE. This is the earliest artwork that includes a male figure found in Europe. Let's talk about something now that's not a sculpture, but a painting, which is far easier to create, which you would think, well, yeah, if it's easier, then maybe more simplistic humans would have made paintings instead of carving, because carving implies that you're imagining a shape. Like Michelangelo said, "I saw the angel in the marble and carved until I set him free." That implies a much more sophisticated way of looking at artwork. But painting, you find some pigment and you slather it on. So this is the idea behind the Sulawesi cave art. It consists of hand stencil dating to at least 37,900 BCE. It is one of the oldest paintings of its type ever discovered in the world. It says stenciled. That means what happened was these prehistoric people, they put their hand on the wall and then they painted everywhere that their hand wasn't. So you see some red outlining a bunch of hands, which is really kind of a cool idea, because back then, I think this was symbolism of the group or the tribe and their strength together, because they couldn't exist individually. There's no painting of just one hand. No, this is many hands, implying that they all work together. You don't need me to interpret these for you, though. You should look up some pictures if you're really curious to know. I think it's really fun to try and come up with your own meanings for these paintings. Isn't that the point of artwork anyway, to come up with your own interpretations in something that's meaningful to you? Another is the El Castillo cave painting, or the Red Disc. The oldest of its kind, the stone cave painting contains the abstracts, sign, and hand stenciled rock art. Out of the variety of paintings discovered in the cave of El Castillo by archaeologist Hermilio Alcalde de Rio, Gallery of the Hands, a disc of red ochre was tested with uranium thorium and dated at least 39,000 BCE. So this painting is basically a horse, except this horse has a tiny head and a really fat body, but I mean, I never get the scale quite correct on my drawings either, so I think this looks pretty good for a horse drawing. I mean, I can clearly tell it's a horse. It's just got a tiny head. It is suggested by some scientists that animals were painted not only because some religious beliefs or mythology of the time back in this ancient era kind of hinted at this spiritual connection between animals and humans, or that when you die, you maybe are reincarnated as an animal. But it was more so that humans depended on animals. We needed them for our survival. Not only did we use them for transportation, we also used them for food. And what could be more important to survival than food? Safety, I guess. That's why a lot of animals that are actually dangerous and violent were worshipped by these prehistoric people. Or maybe not worshipped, but they were just looked at with great respect. Bears, they were very threatening. Can you imagine being a prehistoric person? You're walking around, maybe you're in Europe, and it's not modern day Europe. Think thousands and thousands of years ago Europe. No buildings, no roads, no light posts, just trees and some rocks. You go into one of the caves where you're trying to find shelter from a thunderstorm, and suddenly, from in the back of the cave, out comes this massive bear, and he's mad that you've encroached upon his territory. I'm sure many people died at the hands of bears or claws, but that is how people came to learn to respect and kind of honor them in a way, especially when they killed them and wore their coats. Perhaps it was a way of taking the power from the animal and transferring it into yourself, or just showing that you're so dominant that you can kill a bear and wear its pelt. Well, regardless, this next one, I really enjoy the story behind these. La Ferrasi Cave Petroglyphs. These are from 60,000 BCE, so much older than the previous ones we were just talking about. So this isn't a painting, this isn't a carving per se, it's a rock face with some lines etched into it, and these lines are making the shape of a triangle, and at the bottom of the triangle there's another little slit cut. Well, okay, I shouldn't say the bottom, it's at the top point of the triangle. There's a slit cut up the middle, and the theory is that this is supposed to indicate the feminine image. Females and males are often symbolized with triangles, but more so in a historical context, females have been, especially when you're looking at these petroglyphs, because what this is supposed to look like is a woman's pelvic region. So it has a lot to do with fertility and femininity and reproducing. So the caves that these petroglyphs were found in are located in southwest France. They're famous for this primitive form of rock art dated from 60,000 BCE. Sex is something that's been on our minds forever. And it's not just us, it's all animals. Let's not forget where we came from, everyone. We are, at our very core, animals. Let's look at one that is much older than the ones that we were previously talking about. This one is called Venus of Tantan. There's no specific date nailed down for it. It's somewhere between 200,000 and 500,000 BCE. Roughly around 6 centimeters length and 2 centimeters width, Venus of Tantan is one of the oldest artwork in prehistoric sculpture, discovered in the river Dra near the Moroccan town of Tantan. It was predicted that the artwork was done by pre-Homo sapiens era. Remember how earlier we were talking about the other Venus? The one that was voluptuous and pregnant? The Venus of Whole Fels? Well, this Venus of Tantan, not only is it much older, but it's also much more simplistic, and you could kind of see how something like a Neanderthal or some sort of proto-Homo sapien could make a sculpture like this. Again, it's small, and it's just a rock that has suggestive features on it. It looks like there's a mushy glob area that could be the head, and then 2 arms on the side, but they're not really arms. I mean, they're still connected to the rock. It's just there's some wedges in there. And then a split down the middle, which indicates the legs, and a buttocks. There's a clear buttocks. So this Venus of Tantan isn't really a woman so much as just a human form found on a rock. To me, this says so much about humans, where they came from, and especially what was meaningful to them in their everyday lives. Just other people. I think people inherently love seeing other people and love being around them. And it comes from this era when we were all living together in small groups and relying on each other for existence. This also relates back to the pro-social motivation that we were talking about earlier, where people are motivated by even the existence of other people. But in a lot of ways, society is similar to that now. I mean, we all have jobs, even though now we're a lot more spread out and less centralized than we were back then. We all go to work, or maybe we don't. We work at home. Or maybe you're a welfare queen, in which case you should probably put down the fork, get off the couch, and go get a job where you make money and not just take it from other people through taxes. Anyway, it would be hard for you to have a job if there weren't other people in the world that also had jobs, or that produced things. What would you do with your life? Would you stay at home all day alone? No, you would get depressed. And it's not a choice to become depressed when you're alone. It's just naturally happens because humans evolved to be around and communicate with other humans. We like it that way. We still rely on other people just as much now as we used to. So it makes sense that the most meaningful, simplistic thing that a simple proto-human could have made, if he sat down on his rock one day with his little hammer and his chisel. It's such a beautiful moment. The moment of creation when you feel inspired and empowered to finally sit down and make whatever it is you're thinking of and share it with everyone else. Alright, one more artwork we're going to look at. This one is called Bhimbetka and Daraki Chatan Couples. This dates from somewhere between 290 to 700,000 BCE. One of the oldest prehistoric art ever discovered, dated around 700,000 BCE, is almost 4 times older than the Blombos cave art that we talked about earlier. It was discovered in 2 ancient quartzite caves in the Madhya Pradesh region of central India. That's odd. It wasn't found in Europe or in Africa. It was found in India, indicating that even though humans were separated by thousands of miles and maybe hundreds of years, they were still capable of creating art. And I'm sure there was tons of art created back then that was just lost, but this one lived on forever. And I'm not really sure what this one is interpreted to be, but to me it just looks like an engraving, again, on a cave wall. There's a disc or circle with a line going next to it that kind of looks like maybe a river, a winding river, or a snake. I'm not really sure. It's just an undulating line next to a circle. The article's conclusion about this says that the prehistoric discovery of this different art suggests that different forms of art were practiced throughout the evolution of mankind. That's pretty safe to say. Cave art was widely common at the time, or arguably the only thing that is preserved from the natural occurrence in history. Well, that is also true. Like I said, most of the art created at that time is probably gone. Whether they were making beads or more paintings, many things are lost in the sands of time. A few of them are found, such as these items I've just listed. Trying to figure out what life was like back then from the few pieces that we have is like trying to determine what picture is on a jigsaw puzzle from only one puzzle piece. So I guess it's open to interpretation. What interpretation do you get from this prehistoric art? Do you feel that man is far different and much more advanced now than we used to be? Or do you think that maybe there are a lot of corollaries between us and these proto-humans? See, I think despite all of our technological advances and despite all of the artificial environments that we've created for ourselves, there's still a large part of us that does belong to this prehistoric era. Maybe if we spent more time trying to understand that, then we would have a better understanding of ourselves. Okay, so we've spent more than enough time covering the history of human art forms and where potentially they came from. See, I like to stress the point that we don't really know when or where or how art originated, but what we do know is that slowly over time, it developed, it became more complex. There's more variety, mutations, if you will, that were added into the artistic pool of ideas. And from that, each individual took what was meaningful to them and altered it ever so slightly. And that is kind of taken on a life of its own. I mean, if you look at the body of art that has existed throughout time, you'll see like Renaissance era art looks much different than postmodern art or Art Deco, or even art today, where we have paintings of dogs playing poker, or Doug Stanhope posters, or pumpkins with 420 every day carved into them, or even spray paint graffiti. Some people think of that as art. But what are some of the other applications of creativity? It's not just art, it's not just painting or print or drawing. There's also all sorts of other things that we can apply creativity to. Writing, photography, crafts, sculpture, design, performance art. I love performance art. Singing, acting. Is podcasting potentially even an art form? Who knows, maybe. I think it is, but I'm biased. There are other applications of creativity besides purely art. I mean, yes, that is the main result of it. That is what we all see and think of when we imagine what could we possibly do with this large human potential. But if you recall, in the beginning of this program, like half an hour ago, before I got into all of the history stuff, we said that creativity could be defined as the ability of the mind to be not only creative, but also resourceful. That means taking the limited resources you have and applying them in unique or new or different ways. So if we think about creativity in that aspect, that brings in these other regions such as science and technology, problem solving. Think of engineers, biologists. These are people that face the problems of society and the modern world and come up with solutions. Think of the first skyscraper or the first water treatment facility, vaccines, medicine, hair dye, for Christ's sake. If there's a demand for it, then there's a problem. And the problem is, I want it and it's not there. How do I get it? And that is where creativity comes into play, because you have to have a problem that you're facing in order to solve something and come up with something new. I mean, it's not ultimately completely necessary, but you don't really just think up inventions unless you're really dealing with some sort of issue that you've been thinking a lot about. Take, for example, Nikola Tesla, one of the greatest scientists in modern history. He thought about science a lot, and electricity, and generators. He thought about it on a conscious level, but his greatest insights came after he would have illnesses that nearly brought him to the brink of death. Then he would have these beautiful insights, a flash of genius. That is how his creativity functioned. Maybe yours functions differently. Regardless, it's still the most powerful tool you have. Nobody else has quite your mind or your experiences or your knowledge. Right there, you have something. You have an advantage. All you have to do is put it together in a valuable, meaningful way and present it to the rest of the world. And hopefully everybody else will see that you are providing them with unique value. Every person that has invented anything has done so out of their creative potential. Some inventions were accidents, but you can't rely on that. That's like relying on lightning to strike the same place twice. Almost everyone is capable of that feat, as long as you put your mind to it and you really stay motivated, you stay dedicated to that potential, to your ideas. You have to develop them. You have to focus. At a certain point, it becomes incredibly important if you really are dedicated to this idea of developing your creative potential and your ideas. If you want to make something out of them. At some point, you're going to think, how can I improve my creative potential? How can I better my creativity? Well, luckily there's all sorts of free help out there on the internet, but there are a few proven ways to actually improve your creative abilities. And let's not forget, this isn't just you think about it for a few minutes every day and then it gets better. This is something you have to practice. It's a lifestyle. It's a mode of thinking. So I'm going to go through a short list of things that will help you improve your creative abilities, and hopefully it will work for you. I've already implemented a few of these, and I can tell you it has made a dramatic improvement in my life. I feel much more organized. I feel much more active. I don't feel like I'm thinking of things and then losing them. I feel productive. So, step 1, keep track of your ideas at all times. Many times, ideas come unexpectedly. If an idea is not written down within 24 hours, it will usually be forgotten. Now, that's just what this tip says. For me, if I don't write it down within 15 minutes, I forget it. I'm not kidding. But this is a great tip. Ideas do come when you're least expecting them. And even if you say, this is such a great idea, I'm not going to forget this, you will forget it. Keep a pen and paper close by, somewhere where you know you can run to them, in your car, in your purse, your pocket, whatever. Make a note on your cell phone. Keep track of those important ideas, or the ones that you think are good and you want to develop eventually. Pose new questions to yourself every day. An inquiring mind is a creatively active one that enlarges its area of awareness. This one I could not stress enough. This is probably the most important concept. Creative people, without a doubt, are the most curious and inquiring people you will ever meet. They're the kind of people that ask too many questions, or they can find themselves interested in almost anything. So try it out. Just ask yourself a question that you kind of never really thought about. Find things that you take for granted and ask about them. Figure it out. What is something that you can learn from it? Because you can learn from just about anything. Keep abreast of your field. Read the magazines, trade journals, and other literature in your field to make sure you're not using yesterday's technology to solve today's problems. Now, this one is pretty important, especially if you're somebody whose job it is to come up with new ideas or to keep the company updated. Or if you're just one of those people that likes to be right all the time, which there's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to give off that persona, you have to make sure that you are right all the time. Otherwise, people are going to get annoyed and start finding your weak spots. So don't have any weak spots. Keep up to date. Engage in creative hobbies. Hobbies can also help you relax. An active mind is necessary for creative growth. This one I find really useful. If I ever feel stressed out, I do one of my hobbies. I garden, I paint, I pet my animals. I love my cat. Don't ever let yourself sit and do nothing. Always keep yourself engaged. Keep your mind active. If you let your mind slump, then you're not going to be thinking clearly. You're not going to be on top of your game. And if you feel like you've already tried everything out there, you certainly have not. Go out and try something new. Have courage and self-confidence. Well, to do that, you have to develop it first. Be a paradigm pioneer. Assume that you can and will indeed solve the problem. Persist and have tenacity to overcome obstacles that block the solution's pathway. This is a really good piece of advice, but it's kind of assuming that you know how to have courage and self-confidence. Maybe you need to learn that or improve on it, which is fine. You can do that. Believe in yourself. You can have self-confidence if you don't have it, and you can become courageous as well. But it's the belief that you can and will solve the problem. It's the persistence that really makes the difference. Sometimes you get into this mindset where you feel it inside of you. You know you're going to solve the problem. It makes you feel like a predator, like you're stalking your prey, which is the problem. You're stealthily sneaking up to it with every step of progress. And eventually, you pounce. And there it is, you have your solution. Learn to know and understand yourself. This is something called emotional intelligence. Deepen your self-knowledge by learning your real strengths, skills, weaknesses, dislikes, biases, expectations, fears, and prejudices. This step contains a lot, and I think in future shows I'm going to go over self-knowledge and self-learning. But for now, just know that this is important to developing your creativity. Admit when you're wrong. Admit that you don't like certain things. Be true to yourself. Learn about things outside of your specialty. Use cross-fertilization, just like those bullheaded bees, to bring ideas and concepts from one field or specialty to another. I've talked to certain employers that find that that is a trait in their employees that they really admire. Many times throughout history, people have gone from one field of study to another and have used their previous knowledge to solve problems in a unique way that nobody else in that field had considered because they didn't have the other experience that this person had that was unique to them. So try to broaden your horizons. Avoid rigid, set patterns of doing things. Overcome biases and preconceived notions by looking at the problem from a fresh viewpoint, always developing at least 2 or more alternative solutions to your problem. Don't just think of plan A and believe that that's going to be enough. No, you need plan B and plan C as well, because oftentimes your first idea isn't your best one. Sometimes you have to jot down 20 different ideas and then scan over the list, and you'll find the best one is somewhere in the middle. It's good to practice considering all of the alternatives. That is where the creativity comes into play. Be open and receptive to ideas, not only yours, but also others. New ideas are fragile, like a baby. Keep them from breaking by seizing on the tentative, half-formed concepts and possibilities and developing them. So when you first think of an idea, it's like a fresh young sprout, and it's beautiful, and you know that that's not fully developed. It's not the end of its life cycle. No, it still has to grow and then bloom and sprout the seeds. That's what you have to do with your ideas. You can't just think of them and let them be. You have to add to them and keep developing them. Be alert in your observations. Look for similarities, differences, as well as unique and distinguishing features in situations and problems. No 2 situations are the same, so don't ever assume that you already know the answer when you go into a situation. You have to keep your eyes open. Adopt a risk-taking attitude. Fear of failure is the major impediment to generating solutions which are risky, which doesn't always mean that there's a high risk of death or failure. It just means that maybe there's a small chance of succeeding. These ideas may most likely have a major impact if they are successful. Outline the ways you could fail and how you would deal with these failures, and this will reduce the obstacles to creativity. So basically, you're planning for the future. You're trying to look into the future. What sort of problems do you foresee? And what would you do if that actually happened? See, it's good to consider all of the possibilities, or maybe at least a few of them. That way you're prepared for anything that might happen. And last but not least, the penultimate piece of advice: keep your sense of humor. You're more creative when you're relaxed. Humor aids in putting your problems and yourself in perspective. Many times, it relieves tension and makes you more relaxed. This is true no matter where you go. If you can laugh at yourself, if you can laugh at things when they go wrong, you will never be upset by failure. You will always be able to keep going. It's just keep in mind that you're not perfect, and it's not the end of the world. Even finding things to laugh about requires a certain amount of creativity. So earlier in the show, I made a reference to J.P. Guilford and his presentation to the American Psychological Association. So I wanted to give you a basic introduction to his ideas on the creative abilities of people. So here's an abstract from a paper that he wrote for the American Psychological Association. It is hypothesized that creative artistic talent, apart from scientific creation, is a collection of different component abilities involving cognition, productivity, and evaluation, which are aspects of thinking. Productivity thinking is either convergent, which is obtaining one right answer, or divergent, obtaining a relative answer. Creativity is influenced more by divergent thinking, which has the following 4 factors: fluency, such as words, associational, ideational, and expressive, or flexibility, spontaneous, i.e. flexibility of initiative, and adaptive, or striking out in new and unusual directions. And finally, of originality. There are other factors involving evaluative abilities, not primarily creative. So that was an introduction to J.P. Guilford's ideas of creative abilities. Do you think he was right, or do you have a different definition of what creative is? It's different to all people. It applies to your life in a different way than it does to mine. Regardless, it is a universal talent of people. We all share it, and we all can help each other to develop it. So to help me wrap up the show today, I'm going to just read a few quotes about our creative potential. To live a creative life, we must lose our fear of being wrong. This one, by one of my favorite authors, Ayn Rand, says, "A creative man is motivated by the desire to achieve, not by the desire to beat others." Well, there you have it. I hope you all have enjoyed this show today, or at least learned something. Maybe you've found something that you lost. I know it's easy in today's world of hustle and bustle to forget that we have this ability to be creative and that it can be useful to us or improve our sense of well-being. So hopefully now you can take this knowledge and apply it to your everyday scenarios. Alright, thank you for listening, everyone. You have been listening to the Illumination Hour with your host, Ellen. See you next week.